Hello, and welcome to Metachemistry. This is episode 136, and we're here with a community focus episode where basically we are taking a look at a topic in the community, and in this case, it's about how to help grow your community. So, for this instance, I'll be running our annual training incident league. This will be the third instance of said league, and it's meant to be a new player escalation league. And so we're going to talk about that, break down how I ended up formulating that and the general framework, and kind of talk about how you can use something similar or even the same idea potentially to help communities grow where you are. But before we get started, we want to take a moment to thank Mo Games, the sponsor of Metachemistry. And you can find them over at mo-games.com for all your Infinity needs. If you are a paid patron of Metachemistry at any level, then you get a 10% discount code at their store. And in addition, if you, whether a patron or not, you can be a member of our Discord and enter in for a monthly raffle for a $50 coupon code each month. So to do that, you just join our Discord, you hit the Mo Games role, and then you just need a United States address for Mo to ship to. Because what's better than games? Mo Games. And for this episode, we have Ian and myself. Ian, how have things been going for you lately?
All right. Started my new position at work. It's a lot right now. There's a lot of people out right now, so very shorthanded, and a lot of stuff needs to get fixed. So that's taken up so much of my time right now. And
imagine.
then finally got a contractor to do my basement, so that'll be starting in a couple weeks, and that's gonna eat up more of my time. But outside of that, we almost had a Warcrow tournament. There's a bunch of drops last minute. So unfortunately, we did not end up having the tournament, but Azoka and I still got together to play a game, and he was playing Northern Tribes, I was playing CNN, and it was a blast. We just took a bunch of new stuff that we hadn't played with yet, and just threw things at each other and said, "What does this do?" and had an absolute blast with it. So I'm super enjoying the game and really hoping that we can get more events going for it and get the community to kind of take off on it, because it is a really solid game overall, and especially with now the public announcement that the Mount Haven Dwarves are coming by the Adepticon, so that's going to be pretty cool. I'm super excited for them. They're going to be really cool from what I've seen, and they are going to be my main faction, and I've been waiting for them for the whole time. So it's like they're finally going to come out, and expect we're going to do a little side topic content around some of that once we get like models and stuff for those in hand. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they seem pretty cool. And yeah, I need to get more time in with Warcrow. I always end up wanting to play Infinity instead because the people I know that are interested in Warcrow also play Infinity, and then we just kind of get into the mode of, well, yeah, why don't we just play some Infinity because I'm excited to play it. So that's been my struggle with Warcrow so far, but I've been collecting my own stuff, so I have plenty of options. I just need to actually set aside time and get a game in. So we'll see if that happens in the near future. And then for me, it's just been more regular game night stuff, and then of course getting ready for this league that we're going to talk about more here shortly. But I was playing with one of my friends here, and we had a really good turnout. I think we had 8 people show up at game night this week, which was really nice. Everybody got a game in, which was cool. And yeah, we just rolled for a scenario, ended up landing on Annihilation, and I was playing a next wave list with Achilles, and and he was playing an OSS list with a Marut, and so we just smashed big toys in the middle of the table. So that was neat. Yeah, it was pretty funny. I was really worried because like first engagement with the Marut, and Achilles lost 2 wounds right off the bat. I was a
Oof.
little worried. And then I possessed the Marut, and the Marut proceeded to wipe out all of the order generators in the OSS list, and then walk basically into CC with Achilles to end the turn.
Ah,
And so
very
that
nice.
pretty much cinched that one. But it was a struggle the first turn. Poor Patroclus got crit 2 orders in a row and died immediately. And Achilles took like 4 or 5 orders to kill a rickshaw rocket launcher in good range. So, the usual. But
Yeah.
they got there. Achilles did double crit the Marut and CC, though the Marut lived somehow.
Impressive.
Made 6 of 8 saves. But not the next one. Next order it was done.
Nice.
But yeah, it was pretty fun. So yeah, as far as community building, I kind of initially did the Training Instant League. It haven't been every single year. It's been a little bit spread out. But for me, the big impetus for the first one was the launch of N5, and that really kind of kicked things off. We had done one before N5, but I really wanted to do it again when N5 was coming out, and that was a really, really successful. Just set me up for wildly unrealistic expectations because we had 29 signups. I think we
Yeah.
had only 2 drops.
Mhm.
So we had a really, really great turnout. So this year registration's still up for that, and so we have about 15 people right now. I'm hoping for 20. I feel like that's reasonable. Trying not to color my expectations too much from the previous year and the momentum a new edition brings, but yeah, I think that they are a really fun way to get the community excited about the game. And the Training Incident League is just a packet I have written up about grow leagues. And so it's meant to use a lot of the principles and foundations of ITS, since that's the most common form of play. And it's kind of a way to on ramp players with that type of experience. So, for those who aren't familiar, an Escalation League is a series of games where you play increasing forces. You start out at low points values, and then you grow into larger point values. And so I've found that what works well for me is to do a 5-round event, and I spread them out 2 weeks at a time, which gives each player hopefully plenty of time to find a time to game with their partner, whoever their pairing is. And so I run it just like any other tournament if you've used OTM or Corvus Sphere. It just works the same way. It's basically a 5-round tournament spread over the course of 10 weeks. And so everyone gets their pairings and all that. But yeah, escalation leagues are really fun because it encourages existing players to play points values they normally don't. Because
Mhm.
generally speaking, once you start playing 300-point games, that's kind of what you play with very few exception. Sometimes, maybe you'll get a wild hair to play 400 points or something, but I find, at least in the communities I'm around, very rarely do you go down in points.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. It changes the game very significantly in my mind.
Yeah.
Because
Any
you.
deviation in points value changes it pretty significantly, whether that's going up or down. 400 is
Mm-hmm.
a lot of fun because you get to take even more toys, but the balance kind of shifts towards running heavier stuff because you still have the 15 order max. And then running less points, certain things become more valuable um,
Yeah.
because you can't take everything you want. So models that are much more of a toolbox unit just are that much more useful.
Sure, yeah, and it really forces you to make choices, and in small points games in particular, it means that you really don't have a lot of redundancy. And so that can be kind of tricky. And so because of that, I personally don't like to use the smaller table sizes that are recommended in the ITS guide for, or the ITS doc for s- lower points views, because I feel like even though you're not going to get as many orders, and so crossing the table is a little harder, it also means that different range bands are more valuable. And so one thing that's always kind of awkward is because there's usually a missile launcher or a sniper or something like that in the operations boxes or the two-player starters. And
Hmm.
technically, Sandtrap wasn't a two-player starter, but for our purposes, we're going to treat it like it is. But it's always awkward when you play on those small tables. You're like, oh, I can barely even back up to my good range with this weapon. What am I supposed to do with this? And so I think playing on a full-size board really helps visualize those longer ranges and also kind of give you some incentive to take those tools where normally you might not be able to really use them if you did take them because
Hmm.
your board is so compressed.
Yeah, it also, in my experience, helps prevent the issue of the player that goes first having a Spitfire and just wiping out everything in the first turn.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely one thing because the very first time we ran this league, I went with the recommended table sizes, and that was a very common thing where those low point games were extremely swingy, and generally whoever went first was taking the win out of that just because there would be some sort of like super warband piece, like a dog warrior or Hippolyta or like a bear pod or things like that, where it's like, okay, well, I don't really have many good answers to this, and you can cross the table in two orders. Here we go. So, yeah, another reason to have full table sizes. Plus, I kind of feel like it adds to the spectacle of the game a bit
Hmm.
and kind of gives you something to look forward to and fill out as a newer player. Like, oh wow, look at all this terrain, look at this sweet table. And luckily, our community is very fortunate that we have quite a few players that have terrain available so that new players who are joining don't have to take on that burden and can still play on cool tables.
Yeah.
And another thing that is kind of set up to make it easier for new players, and I think that this is very important if you're trying to grow a community of newer players where they're not as familiar with the game or they haven't bought it as as much, is to play missions that require less accoutrement. Like, so the format that I always use for this is direct action. So you don't need an operations deck, you don't need HVT models. And when this initially came out, I didn't have pre ITS models being used either, because I think that was the first one when you could take
Hmm.
the motorized bounty hunter, I think it was, or in the Bashi Bazoo.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah. So yeah, so avoiding players needing anything other than the absolute basics. Like you need dice and a measuring tool and templates and tokens and minis, of course, and some method of tracking your list. So which is already a fair bit. So trying to lower that barrier of entry will help a lot. At least it has in my experience. So that was definitely one thing I wanted to keep in mind, even though about half of the players most years are kind of enfranchised players. That still means about half of them are fairly new to very new to the game. And so trying to make it as easy as possible for people to play really helps a lot with that. Likewise, I don't charge an entry fee for this. That may be something you need to do in newer events. It may not. It just kind of depends on how much you want to dive into support what you need to have a space. If you have a gaming club that requires renting tables or whatnot, or if you go somewhere that has a fee, something to keep in mind. But yeah, really, the name of the game for me has been to make it as easy as possible because Infinity is already a challenging game. So to try and limit that challenge as much as we can will certainly help when you're getting new players onboarded.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is to try and do some things to focus on engagement. And so that can come in a number of different ways. And I've tried a few things over the last few years, one of which was an achievements system. And I might tweak this a little bit to do a simplified one for this year. But last year I had a big achievement board where there were 8 categories and there were 5 tiers of achievements that you could get throughout the league. And if you finished an entire category, then you would get a small prize. And I had custom pins made for those and neat stuff like that. But each category was themed after a certain like unit or maybe play style. So like there was one about doing things with tags, and that was the Ironmonger category. And then there was the operative category, which was about doing bonus objectives during missions and focusing on scoring and things along those lines, and so on and so forth. So that can be fun, and a handful of players engaged with that and had a good time, and we're tracking those throughout. One that I want to push more this year is a hobby engagement. And so in this case, doing raffle entries for prizes based on painting. And so based on the size of the model, bigger models will get you a couple more entries. And uh, basically, if you finish painting a model to whatever standard that means for you, like and I just kind of run this off honor system, but generally it's if you feel like you have finished the model to your satisfaction, then there you go, you get an entry, and then at the end, we'll go ahead and pull for a prize for whoever wins that raffle. And then we'll also do a best painted voting for an army. So that way there are some ways for people to engage with another side of the hobby of the game, and
Mhm.
it's not just based on play performance. And then lastly, attendance, because it can be easy to fall off because this is 2.5 months, and sometimes things get in the way and you just can't make a game, and that happens. But otherwise, like making sure that people are still interested throughout. I have been playing around with giving prizes for last year. I printed out turrets for players to use, and you got a turret for every round you participated. Round 4, an FAQ dropped that you couldn't reload turrets anymore, and turrets became much less desirable. So that didn't quite work out, but it was really cool at first. By the way, if people need turrets, I guess I still have those. So. And then if you completed all 5 rounds, then I made you a set of 40mm objective markers, and they just look like server racks, basically. And so that can be a way, and you might have other methods of encouraging that, like maybe you do raffle tickets for attending, and so every round you get a raffle ticket for some prize, or whatever the case may be. I think that's just like an extra little layer of incentive to keep people coming and keep playing, especially if someone doesn't feel like they're doing well. It can be very easy to get discouraged and drop out. Luckily, I haven't had very many of those throughout the history of running these leagues, but it does happen sometimes. And so having things outside of just pure game performance can really go a long way in keeping everyone involved, even if they're not necessarily going to win the event. So, one of the other things that I wanted to do for this league, and then I did as well for last league, was to make custom missions. And I try to keep these fairly simple, and I try to make them twists on classics. as opposed to full overhauls. One, to give veterans a little bit of frame of reference, and two, to make sure I don't go overboard with weird mechanics that might turn off new players. And so I made a set of 5 missions. And for those of you listening, if you want a copy of this packet, or even just the missions, feel free to drop a comment wherever you're listening, or send us a message on Discord or what have you. Or maybe I'll see about putting a link in the show notes. If you want to take a look at those or have any interest in that, maybe you want to try running your own training incident league in your community. That'd be great. But, and then what we can do is we can go over the missions kind of briefly. I don't want to read through the whole packet or anything like that, but just kind of talk about my thought process in creating these missions and some of the things that I kind of hope to achieve, and maybe a little bit about what we think makes a good mission, and maybe these hit those criteria and maybe they don't, but hopefully they do.
Yeah.
So, first off, this is a mission that I took from last year's league as well, just because I liked it as a starter mission. I called it Take and Hold. And so essentially, there is a communication antenna in the center of the board that you want to both activate and then control. And then you get points for surviving units. And the highest threshold is pretty high. This is 150 points for the first round. And so ideally, you want to keep more than 125 points on the table, which is a challenge, right? That's very little wiggle room for casualties. But one of the things that I tried to do in these missions was to either thematically or mechanically incentivize certain play with, I just called them bonus objectives, but this was my way of giving newer players a taste of classified objectives without needing that deck and dealing with the randomness and things like that. So in this mission, I put in combat support, which of course is to remove a wound from an ally. So the idea is you probably won't be able to keep everything alive quite that well just on your own. Maybe you will if you just kind of walk over your opponent, but that you'll have some method of force reconstitution in your list, whether that's a doctor or engineer or paramedic or whatever the case may be, that you'll bring something to try and keep your forces together. And so that's worth a point. And then going to the center so that half the points have to do with the antenna. So you kind of have to engage that way. Like theoretically, you don't you could stay back and try and preserve points, but then your opponent is preserving points and dealing with the antenna, and so that's just not tenable if you're trying to actually win the mission. So it kind of forces you to get out and move and kind of get in the middle, which is kind of a common thing with most Infinity missions, just to kind of make sure that players are engaging and that there is some sort of conflict and that players aren't trying to avoid one another while they're playing the game and not taking risks, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the mission just for the kind of the simplicity of it, but while also forcing conflict towards the center of the board. It's interesting to try to keep things. We have to fight over this, but we also don't want to lose guys, and then folding in essentially a single classified objective cards rules as an objective point is really neat, especially for newer players to kind of get them used to the idea of maybe you need to take something specific to do certain objectives as opposed to just taking generic whatever specialists. So yeah, I like it a lot. I think it's very to the point, but it gives a lot of incentive to take certain things that would be important in full ITS missions or a tournament.
Yeah, the hope is that it kind of gives you a taste of that. And what I did last year, but have removed since ITS has changed, because each year I try and model it after ITS, so that way, once the league is over and players are playing, it still is at least fairly familiar once you move into other missions. And so in this case, I had used specialist bonuses, and each mission had a different specialist bonus last year. But this year, I opted for operational learning instead, since that's the current
Mhm.
method in ITS to reduce the possibility of just blanking order after order trying to hit an
Yeah.
objective. And so that's a way for players to see that instead. But otherwise, I really liked using the specialist bonuses, including ones that were not very common prior. So that was kind of fun. I miss specialist
Mhm.
bonuses, honestly.
Yeah.
But operational learning is helpful for sure.
I also like that this one doesn't allow fire teams or command tokens, considering it is the 150 point mission. And some people, it'll be the kind of their first real introduction to playing Infinity. So
Mm-hmm.
taking one of the more complex aspects of the game off the plate for the first mission, where also fire teams and some of the command token usages could be very, very overly powerful at this point's level.
Yes.
So I think that's a really good idea to limit that in the smallest points bracket of the league.
Yeah, somebody pulling two orders when somebody wanted to, bring basically a starter box of 6 or 7 guys is
Yeah.
a rough place to start. So yeah, I thought about keeping that rule. I just called it new recruits and saying, yeah, you can't form fire teams, command tokens cannot be used. I thought about keeping it for the first 2 missions, but I decided not to just because fire teams are such a notable part of the game that I wanted people to have some experience with those earlier rather than later. And so after the first round, that new recruits rule goes away.
Yay.
Yeah. And then the round 2, you go up to 200 points, and we have this mission, Close Quarters. This is effectively a quadrant control mission where you're trying to hold areas between the deployment zones, but there are consoles across the center line, uh, 12 inches in each way. So there's 3 across the center. And so you're just trying to activate those consoles, hold those rounds, and the bonus was Predator for this one, so getting 2 CC kills throughout the game. The idea basically that players are moving in, trying to jockey for position, and that you're going to get into sort of this brawling range, and that, maybe having some warband or CC oriented unit will kind of help you out in that instance.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool one just with quadrant control. I like it. I like that this does not have one in each quadrant because that's common in most of the quadrant control missions for the consoles.
Sure.
And so I do like that it has kind of quadrant control with the line of objectives across the center. But the uh, Predator, I think that really focuses the list building for this because you got to get in there and dominate quadrants, but that also means that especially if you're going into the quadrants on your opponent's half of the board, uh, trying to incentivize some close combat, I think is really cool.
Yeah, if I thought it was more feasible, I would have actually had this be an objective room mission, but
Hmm.
I don't want people to worry about having the right pieces of terrain to make that
Yeah,
work and having to ensure that everybody has objective rooms, but that would be my ideal. But yeah, this felt like a way to kind of encourage that without being, too overbearing with it. And theoretically, anything in the game can get Predator if you
yeah.
knock the opponent out first. So, but yeah, another one that is much more on the simple side, just to kind of ease in again that 200 point limit. Before moving on to point of failure, which is our round 3. At this point, we're almost at full games because we do 100 or 150, 200, 250, 300, 300. So this is the 250 level. And this one is very much like looting and sabotaging from previous seasons, where there is an AC2 objective at the edge of each deployment zone that you're trying to destroy. And the bonus here is sabotage, which is you pick a building in your opponent's DZ or a scenery piece in your opponent's DZ and have to decharge it. So again, that's just kind of a nod to, hey, having things with decharges will be helpful. And so that is the most safe way to deal with AC2s, as it doesn't trigger the defense system.
Yep.
And it's also just kind of fun with the theme of it, where you're trying to destroy some enemy material.
Yeah, no, so it's a classic mission, just taken down a notch because it's only at 250 points for this. But yeah, it's really lined up nicely with the sabotage on this one, so that it does like it's already incentivizing taking them, but then it's like an extra incentivizing, and that's pretty cool to get people in that mindset of taking things for doing the objectives. So a lot of reinforcement there, liking that a lot. And I think that this one is going to be probably where the game is starting to come together for some of the newer players. And they're really starting to kind of see how things are working together with the rules, and starting to come up with, having enough points to make a cool list, while still having some restrictions, just because it is not a full-size game yet. So I think this is where the midpoint of the league, that things start clicking for a lot of the newbies, and that's a really solid mission to do that with.
Yeah, and part of it is because, like in looting and sabotaging, you get points for protecting your AC2 and keeping it as undamaged as possible, while damaging and destroying the enemy AC2. And so this mission kind of pushes you in two different directions in a way that the previous missions don't quite do. And I make a note that you can repair the AC2. So again, just another incentive to, hey, maybe you want an engineer or somebody with a gizmo kit to try and work on that. But yeah, and this one is probably the most direct analog to an existing mission. But the last two missions at 300 points, I get a little bit more weird. Not too crazy, but just something
Yeah.
that's a little bit more exciting. And these are a little bit more narratively driven than some of the previous. So round 4, you're now at full 300 points, and this one is triangulation. And so this is a ground control mission, but with consoles. So sort of like supremacy in a way, or superiority. But it is bands up the center, so like front line or battleground. And there are those 3 bands, and there's a console in the center of each band. And you are trying to hold the priority sector. And so initially, it's the center sector. And then you also want to use the trace the signal short skill, which is done by activating a console in the priority zone. And so once you hit that, then you roll in the priority zone may shift. And so you still want to hold that zone or that sector at the end of the round. And then the bonus here is telemetry, which is you need to mark a target with a forward observer or spotlight. And this is just more of like a narrative push. So the idea is that you're trying to track down this signal, you're trying to mark a target, you're trying to kind of get this intel and hold on to that information throughout.
Yeah, no, like this one's great because now we're in full points bracket mode. It's going into much more like what a full ITS mission would be doing. So I think this is a great intro to full size game for a lot of the newer players. It's got enough going on to be interesting without being, I think, overbearing, which is important. And then just yeah, the tracing the signal thing I think is actually super cool, just to kind of keep the models moving around the board and having to dance around the opponent's AROs and things like that to try to get the objectives. So I think that's actually a super cool idea, uh, and maybe it's something CB will play with at some point.
I don't know about that, but it might be fun. I kind of
Yeah.
like the idea that you help if you want to get the points, since the tracing the signal is round over round also, that you kind of want to do it early. That way, if the zone moves to somewhere that's not favorable to you, you
Mm-hmm.
still have orders to try and grab that. And then, in case people aren't hitting buttons, I put in a clause that said, like, "Hey, if at the end of a game round neither player has traced the signal, then it becomes the sector nearest to the player who took the first turn." So that way, because this is almost all of the points are end of round scoring, which of course favors second turn. The only one that's not is a point for getting telemetry, um, but just a way to kind of like help if the first player is struggling, that they can kind of get back in it a little bit. So there's a little bit of catch up mechanic there.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one was a little bit different, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But then we have the last one that we'll be playing for round 5, which is another 300-point game, and this is Packet Loss. And so this one is a little bit weird also, and again is kind of narratively driven more so than rounds 3 and prior. But you get 4 points for infecting the comm log of the enemy lieutenant, and so that's just a skill laid out in the mission that you just need to be a specialist in zone of control, and you make it's a scenario comms attack skill, so it's affected by firewall, it's opposed by a reset, etc. But you get a +3 mod if you're doing it inside of silhouette contact. And so that one can be kind of tricky, which is why it's worth quite a few points. But then in a method similar to supplies, there's 2 consoles on the sides of the board. They each have a data pack, and the data packs effectively work like supply boxes. And so you get points for controlling each of those as well. And then the bonus is kind of hacker centric with this mission. So I went with data scan, which is the hacker needs to make a whip roll against an enemy trooper in ZOC, and it's a comms attack. And so it's kind of reminiscent of the idea of in fact, the comlog portion of it. And so basically, it's kind of the idea of the mission is you are trying to capture sensitive data from the consoles while bugging the lieutenant. And so if you kill them on the table, then you won't get a chance to infect their comlog first. So you'll have to
Yeah.
wait until they nominate a new lieutenant. Now, just to make sure it's less punishing, I put in the reinforced tactical link, and so the lieutenant is open information, they can't become a marker, and there's no lost lieutenant scenario. So just to make it so it's not quite so debilitating if somebody gets that really quick. But yeah, in retrospect, I feel like maybe it's not quite as involved
Mhm.
as triangulation, but I liked the story of what was going on in my head when writing it seemed fun.
Oh no, I think this one's absolutely great. It's kind of like weird hunting party.
Yeah, I could see that. A little bit of hunting
And
party, a little bit of
yeah,
supplies.
yeah. I dig it. I think that the idea of going in and getting, infecting the lieutenant's comm log, getting the bonus for doing it in silhouette contact, which, use adhesive or knock them unconscious
Hmm.
or something before you do that. Pretty
Yep.
awesome. But yeah, it's got enough stuff going on now between that last mission and this mission that by the end of the league, newer players should be pretty up to speed on things to expect in like a full ITS or a mission or in a tournament. Because obviously they won't be these, but they will be things very similar in concept that they will now have experienced and been able to write lists for. So I think that's actually a really good way to get people up to speed on what that looks like for ITS missions.
Yeah, and there were definitely periods where I thought about using ITS missions. For the
Mhm.
first league, I did just use the direct action missions, but I like that there's more freedom, obviously, because I'm writing missions and can kind of turn the dials manually in terms of how I want to do it. Whereas if I'm using an existing mission,
Mhm.
I feel like I want to make sure that it is that mission and not tweak things with it and still call it the same thing because I don't want to teach people bad habits or, you know, oh, well, when I played this during the league, I could do this and I had operational learning and this mission doesn't have it. And so I thought that I was going to get bonuses or whatever. So being able to avoid those sorts of situations is definitely something I wanted to keep in mind. But yeah, so that's kind of a breakdown of what the packet itself looks like and what the missions are going to look like. I may, like I said earlier, I may go back and do some simplified
Mhm.
version of the achievements chart because I think that was pretty fun. Um, One thing that I also kind of want to talk about is prize support. And prize support can be kind of a tricky one because I know at least for some organizers, because I've done this, is I feel like there's pressure to provide cool things for the people playing to make them interested and keep people's attention and things like that. I run a survey for each of these
Mhm.
uh, at the end, and prizes always rank kind of low. So I don't know why I keep pressuring myself to do this, but prizes are fun, prizes are exciting, and I think that there is something to be said for having that. And I still intend to have good prize support for this event. But I don't think if you're doing this as a startup to a new meta around you or a new group of players, that you should feel pressured to spend a bunch of money to try and, get stuff for everyone.
Mhm.
I think that, um, I think even if it's just a tournament pack, which not that you even need to do that, to be honest, but just getting a tournament pack means that you have a winner pin, a last place wooden spoon, a cool exclusive mini, and then some other neat little aids or patches or similar. Like that's a pretty good start and isn't wildly expensive, but even if that's not in your budget, you can also get away with doing more handmade things, or you can design. Yeah, you can get stickers or other kind of smaller things. If you have been in the game and you have kind of a large collection, one thing I've done is just donated some of the things that I decided I wasn't going to use. And
Yeah, we
so
got so many
that can be
ITS
a way.
kits floating around that we just
Right.
give out stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And that kind of leads into another point of if you are trying to grow a community, but you have some veterans, kind of bring them in on the process a little bit and check with them because some people may be interested in donating things. So that's another way you can get prize support is you can have if you have more enfranchised veterans who want to chip in, that can take a number of forms. Maybe they have some spare patches, or they have some extra minis, or they can throw in some money for some prize, or whatever the case may be. It's worth checking to see if people are available for donations. Like you don't need to be pushy about it or things like that. Uh, but some people are more than happy to kind of help out their community or a growing community that way. And also, you can look for sponsorships. One other thing you can do is I know that, um, like Jay over at Arsenal and crew there, um, they're always really helpful with those sorts of things and like to
Mhm.
help communities grow. So companies like that, or you can check in with Ruben over at Mo Games, uh, or James at Interstellar Games, or of other places that, or those that sell gaming aids. So you can talk to like Baron of Dice or Frontline Gaming or things like that. And you can look at other companies and kind of talk to them just to see if there's an option for them sponsoring your event to some degree. Or even better, maybe you have local game stores who are willing to provide you space. I've seen some places that will do starter set discounts. So it's like, oh, okay, well, if you want to start a new army, either you're a new player buying into the game or you're an existing player and a Grow League sounds like a great excuse to try a new faction, you can get a discount at the store that we play at, and they'll give you an extra, 5-10% off or whatever the case may be. Or they might be willing to contribute gift cards or things like that. So there are a lot of ways to potentially acquire prize support to try and make that event more exciting, but also don't feel pressured to do so. You don't need a big prize pool to make a good event.
Yeah, actually, prizes are kind of a tertiary thing for me, at least. I think a lot of players is kind of a tertiary thing with behind the community and playing the games.
Right, exactly. And like I've mentioned, yeah, people are like, I think people like prizes, and that's fun, but they don't need prizes. Especially, they'll be understanding if this is a small operation and it's just you and you're just trying to do something to get your friends out to come and play games. I don't think most people are going to, look down their nose at you for not having, you know, tons of prize support or anything like that. Like, it can be fun, but don't stress out over it. But yeah, so trying to keep people engaged, trying to look at different forms of engagement, both with the actual play, with participating with people, having uh, a place to communicate. So we have like a local Discord for our community, and so that's what we use. And so that's great for people to show off their painted models, so people can be engaged in the painting and hobbying side of it. They can talk about lists together. They can talk about their next match or cool things that happened. Encourage players to take photos if they can. It's not always easy to remember, and I forget the vast majority of the time. But that's a great way to kind of post and so engagement breeds further engagement, right? So if somebody is in your whatever selected forum of communication, the more active people are there, the more likely it is for additional people to become active and so on. And so a lot of that about organizing events or building community in general is being proactive, encouraging people to interact as well, and just fostering a you know a community with a good attitude and that people want to be a part of. And so with that, we're just about ready to come in with our final thoughts on the topic. But before we do, I want to say a big thank you to our patrons. We really appreciate your support. It helps us out tremendously in doing what we do. And if you're interested in joining that elite cadre of supporters, we'd love to have you. You can find us on patreon.com/metachemistry, and we have a variety of benefits to try and show our gratitude in return for your gracious support of the show. So things like early access to episodes, some private channels on our Discord, uh, final voting on polls, and things like that. But even if that's not something that you're able to or interested in, we'd still love to have you on our Discord. And you can find that in the show notes as always. And our Discord, other than the aforementioned couple private channels, is a free and open area to talk about Infinity. So if you are working on building your community or want to run a league to drum up interest, come on over. And if you want to ask questions or take a look at the packet or whatever the case may be, we'd love to chat about it with you. And also, as a nice little bonus, that if you have a US address, you can join in for the monthly giveaway we mentioned at the top of the episode. But with that said, Ian, final thoughts on escalation leagues and community growth and running events and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm actually a big fan of the escalation leagues. I think that they're really important for bringing in new players. I think they're really important for growing community and getting people playing against players that they aren't necessarily playing on the weekly game nights. So it helps grow community, helps, you meet new people to play, new friends, things like that. I think it's great for existing players that want to start a new faction or a new sectorial where they can kind of start off slow and get 150 points ready and then move up to 200 and so on, and so they don't have to go all at once into full size games with it to kind of test out that new faction. And then because of the way this is structured, being able to change up your list between games allows you to really kind of test drive a few things before you get to full size games. So I think it's great for new players. I think it's great for existing players. It's great for the community just to get people interacting with each other. So escalation leagues, I don't really see a downside to them. They're pretty much positive all the way across, and I think that they're a great option to try to grow your local community if you have a lot of newer players that are looking to get into the game, because then it also helps them to kind of get mentored a little bit by the more veteran players that have been playing for a while.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree that escalation leagues are just fun. It's a different way to play than I think most players tend to on the regular. And you might try units that you wouldn't really consider on a regular game night in an escalation league. Like, oh, well, I wouldn't bother with these units, your basic line troops, too often. But maybe in a 150 point game, I might take those couple alguaciles or what have you. Or otherwise just play with units in a very low stakes way that, is just kind of a fun way to try new things. And it's a great time to, expand to another faction if you're interested in that, or you have players that have been around for a bit and maybe they just have a faction that they've shelved for a while, or they picked up minis they meant to use and just hadn't gotten around to it. And those things can help. One thing I would say, just as another point of advice, is to kind of gauge the temperament and mentality of your community as much as possible.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, you may not know the people who are joining, but one thing I try to do is I have everyone submit their list. So, because they're varying points throughout, you can't really use the same list. And I don't force people to just tack on 50 more points to their list round over round or anything like that, because Infinity doesn't work very well in that way, from my experience. But I ask players to submit their lists. And so that kind of gives me a way to gauge. One, obviously, players will kind of break away as they do well and their scores will go up. And so they'll get paired with other players who are doing well. But you can also use looking at those lists to kind of judge, like, hey, is this person going to create a fun experience? Or does it look like their partner's going to just get entirely run over? Now, I try to keep a fairly hands-off approach on that. Like, I very rarely ask someone to change their list, but every so often, there'll be something where, like, maybe we don't play Achilles at the 150 point level. Let's try something different. So, things like that where it's going to obviously be a very heavy skew and make the game potentially unfun for their opponent. So I try not to intervene much, but that is a way you can use to try and set up more interesting pairings. And also, I have players submit their scores online. Now, I know Corvosphere does this now, and that's new since the last league. But I have a Google form that also has like a sportsmanship section walks through each objective point to ensure that, your score matches what you accomplished. And so you're more likely to remember that. Um, but spo- uh, but sportsmanship scores can help quite a bit there as well, where, hey, if you see a trend where several people haven't enjoyed their games with someone, you may want to talk to that person or, talk to their opponents and see what was happening. And then you might need to sit down and have a conversation with the person that they didn't enjoy playing with, just to make sure that, you're fostering a community where people are having fun and want to have fun, instead of, somebody who's coming in who just wants to, you know, club all the new players or whatever the case may be. So
Clubbing baby
that can,
seals is not okay.
yeah, it's like we're trying to get people into the game to enjoy it, and just, slapping people around silly without any recourse or anything that helps them understand what's going on
Yeah.
doesn't really help.
Mediating the game where two baby seals club each other, totally acceptable.
Right. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the point of growing a community is to have more people to play with, to have more people enjoy the game that we love so much, and to help keep said game going. Because if you're not getting new players, eventually people are going to fall off. There won't be people to play, and it's just not going to be very fun to sit and try and, make it work on your own and do some solo play Infinity forever. So, building community, super important. I hope that you have enjoyed this conversation about the Training Incident League, and maybe you're interested in using that as a tool for your own community to kind of grow and help onboard new players, or take it and run with it and make some sort of variation, or, whatever works for you and your players there. But yeah, because that's what we all need, right? If we want to keep playing, we have to have people to play with. And why wouldn't you want to introduce your friends to, you know, hobbies that you enjoy? And on behalf of Metachemistry, this has been Devin.
And Ian. And that's the meta.